Creative Katie, Karen Burchill. Welcome to my channel, Mixed Media Creations. Take time to hit the subscribe button if you're not a subscriber, and even if you are, hit the bell and select the option to be notified as soon as I upload new ones. Today we have a tutorial entitled Reach for the Stars. I'm doing this on a canvas, but you can do this on an art journal page of any size. This tutorial is packed full of art journaling or mixed media techniques, so stay tuned. First off, we're going to start with collage sheets. So these are some of my gel prints, some of my colored coffee filters, and I've picked out blues and teals with different patterns and colors. Now I want some contrast, so I have the dark blue one there. Now if you want to see how I created some of these papers, check my jelly printing playlist, because that's where you're going to find them, especially the ones where I use everyday items to get some of this lovely texture on these papers. Now, while I want some interesting pattern in some of these, I'm also looking to see that there's something that connects them. So a lot of that dark blue that I have, that you can see some of that torn paper, that blue is pretty much on all the other ones. So there's dark blue, and that's just going to build interest. Now the purpose of starting with the collage papers is, one, it gives you color. It gives you a starting point. And if you have a hard time getting started, don't know what color to start with, that's kind of an easy way. Pick a few papers that look good to you, and then that you bounce off of that, you bounce off the patterns that you've created. It also builds texture. Even if you manage to cover it all up, it's going to add some very interesting physical texture. Then you have the visual texture of the patterns that you actually see on these collage papers. These collage papers, I deliberately try to get ones of different weights. So there's some that are copy paper, some that are a little heavier than copy paper, some that are on deli paper, some that are on the coffee filters. And each one just adds a little bit different texture. Now when you look here, you're looking at the colors, that green, that yellow green, which I absolutely love, and have just bought a second tube of it because I just find that it works so well. Just have something that's very bright. You want to have contrast. So I've got the dark and I have the light in there, and I'm ripping off any straight edges, and I'm not too worried. So we have an analogous color scheme here as you look on the color wheel, the 5 that work together. Now I'm going to use some of those colors I'm pulling off from the collage sheets, and I'm just going to use the palette knife to spread this on. Later I'm going to add color with a brush, and it's going to be diluted, but this is a little bit darker and it gives a different effect. So again, you're building interest, you're building color, and how you put on paint will change. So give that a try with a palette knife, and remember, you're adding on top of it, so don't panic at this stage. Remember, every page or canvas goes through this ugly stage where everything kind of looks awkward. And I'm pulling the lights and the darks, building interest into this canvas. Now everything that I'm doing on the front, I'm also doing on the sides. It's just that's really hard to catch on the camera, so I'm doing that off camera for the larger part. So once that's dry, I'm using the Crafter's Workshop Light and Fluffy Modeling Paste, which I love. I'm almost at the end of this jar, and I'm putting it through a snakeskin stencil, also from the Crafter's Workshop. And I love this stencil because to me it looks like seaweed and sea bubbles. And since I'm in the sea theme, I kind of want that. It's not a big area for the most part, and you're not going to see a whole lot of it, especially in pictures, but in real life you can see that texture, and it adds that dimension, which for me, every piece really needs. Now, if you don't have modeling paste or prefer not to use it, That's fine. Just pick a color and stencil with the same stencil. You'll get a similar effect. You just won't get the dimension part. And I'm using my favorite modeling paste tool, the key card. I find I have the most success with modeling paste using it. Now the modeling paste will take paint differently than the collage sheets, than anything that has the gel medium. And I love those differences. So here I'm taking the colors that I have in the background and putting it on a palette, and I kind of sprayed this with water, and I'm just putting it on. Now I'm trying to only get the areas of white. If I overlap a little bit over the collage sheets, that's good, but for the most part, my goal is to keep the collage sheets there, keep them interested. Sometimes I get too heavy-handed and they kind of disappear. I really want to keep them to show in the final piece. Here I'm thinning the paint because I don't want it to be so opaque. I put some paint on with the palette knife. That's more opaque and more solid. This is not. Some of the texture paste has been left white. Now I've grabbed my Prussian blue on the side and I am stamping with shelf liner, and I love it. You do not need to go buy a fancy stencil. Go buy several kinds of shelf liners. They all are great mark making tools. And I find myself reaching more and more for the homemade or free mark making tools. Here's a stamp that I created with Fun Foam. And you'll notice I'm not getting a perfect stamp. I don't care. This is a background piece. This is just going to add interest, and I wanted something that was a little bigger in size, since so much of what I've stamped is smaller. I tried this stamp. It's like little bubbles, but it's not really showing up, so I grab my shelf liner again and I'm putting it on. So now I have the shelf liner in the Prussian blue and the shelf liner in the white. And that's something that I do quite often. Use the same stencil or stamp and use it with two different colors. And I find that gives a lot of cohesion to the piece and interest. So that might be a trick that you try. Just putting the shelf liner around the edges. And the background is done. So now we're moving towards the focal point. So here I just downloaded some starfish off the internet, a template, and I just want the shape of it. So I cut a larger size and a smaller one, and I'll put a link to my Build a Stash video where I talk about using templates, creating your own templates for your mixed media art journal pages, especially for those of us who can't draw or don't think we can. And I'm just tracing this with my Stabilo All pencil. This is a white one. You can use a watercolor pencil. You can use a pen or a pencil if you want. I'm using this because it will disappear. Once I add any liquid on it, it'll completely disappear. So I'm going to cut out these stars and they'll be ready for the next step. This stencil that you see here I got from the dollar store, and I don't think you can find it anymore. So you can stamp with letter stamps. You can use a stencil that has letters and stencil the letters on from an alphabet stencil. You can put it on paper. You can, I could also cut this with my Silhouette Cameo or your Cricut if you're fortunate enough to have one of those, or have a friend that has one of those. I will look in Amazon to see if I can find a stencil that's already done that has this saying. So look in the description box below. I'm using a makeup sponge, and I'm using a combination of Prussian blue and Payne's gray. And both are a bit transparent, so you can still see the lovely colors and textures that we developed in the background, even though I've used this dark paint to make these letters stand out. Now it looks like I'm going very quickly, but in reality I am taking my time when I'm stenciling. I'm adding a little bit of paint at a time and building up layers if I want it to be darker. The worst thing you can do when it comes to stenciling is put too much paint on the makeup sponge or press too hard. The paint will squeeze underneath. So there are my focal images, and I'm just arranging them. And I want them to kind of go over some of the letters, because if something's not perfectly straight or perfectly stenciled, it's just a look I like. So once I figure out exactly how I want these starfish to be on this page, I'm going to glue it down with gel medium. And remember, I have texture on this canvas. There's modeling paste and there's the collage sheets. And when you have that, it's going to be a little bit more work to get things to perfectly adhere down. And I'm wrapping it around the canvas because I think it looks really cool when you look at the side and you see the starfish tentacles, arms, legs, whatever they're called, wrapping around and adding that little bit of color on that side. The most success putting the gel medium on the canvas and then on the back of whatever you're gluing down works the best. But I did go back afterwards and check the tips and add some more gel medium to make sure everything was perfectly adhered. So don't be in a panic if you're finding you're having to do that. That's quite common. So just making sure everything is perfectly adhered down. So once everything's down and glued down perfectly, I'm going to move to the detailing part of this canvas, which tends to take a lot of time. I've cut out a lot of it and I've fast forwarded, really increased the speed on this because you don't need to watch me doing it. I will put a link to my technique tag video where I explain how to shade or highlight, including this float technique. But in the float technique here, I'm using burgundy on top of this, but I will also be using Prussian blue and Payne's gray and then white. So I kind of do multiple colors. The white is more highlighting and the two colors just build interest. So I've shaded on top of the starfish, on the paper of the starfish, and now I'm going on the canvas on the outside of the starfish. And that's kind of giving more shadows. And you're trying with your shading to build up those shadows, making it look more 3D. Now I absolutely love, I get into my Zen zone when I'm doing this. I find this very, very relaxing and I could do hours and hours of it, and I definitely have. But it is a technique that takes practice, so don't get frustrated. This is an 11 by 14 canvas, and it's about the largest that I can do a video with. I don't have a huge workspace that I can film in. Hopefully you can see the difference once without being shaded, and then what happens once I do the float technique. But there are other ways of shading and you can do them. Now here I'm adding highlights with the white using the same technique. Now my goal isn't necessarily to have a ring of white around this, a solid ring, just to have some highlights. Now I'm not really following any of the rules about where the highlights are and the position of the sun and the light. I just kind of go what I think looks good. But you can look at pictures to figure out where you should be putting highlights and follow that. And that's a good way of learning and something I do want to do, just not today. I find every little step that you do adds to the finished product. And if you miss one of these steps, you're going to end up with something slightly different. So in this fine liner bottle, I have white acrylic paint, Liquitex Basics, that has been thinned to the consistency that works for what I'm doing here. And that's just trial and error. You don't want it too runny that it runs out, but you don't want it too thick that it's hard to get out of the bottle. So it's just trial and error. Now remember, on this canvas I have a lot of texture, from the collage sheets that have been glued down to the texture paste. So it's not smooth, so that, you know, some of the bumps that you get. And I find the best way of making sure is to pick small areas and to keep turning the canvas so I can put on the paint in the way that's easiest for me to be most successful. So am I going up? Am I coming down? What am I doing? And this, you know, again, is a skill that just takes practice. I have spent a lot of time using the fine liner bottle, and then outside of time, when you see videos of me using it, I've actually practiced, you know, going around things and how much pressure, and work, you know, experimenting. I guess I'm saying don't expect to try to do it and have it work perfectly. Sometimes there's a learning curve, and sometimes you've got to practice. But if it doesn't work, try it again. Keep trying till you get it to work the way it works for you. I find the gold, I'm not sure if it's the gold or the consistency I have the gold, but it's a little too runny and too unpredictable. So I got to play around with that a little bit more, add more gold paint, and try it a little bit thicker. And I have 4 bottles. I have one that has Prussian blue in it, one that is black, white, and gold. But you can put any color in it that you want. Here I'm just using kind of the stitched look on top. This took some practice because initially when I started I would get kind of teardrop looking ones. So I've had to adjust how I'm holding it and how I place it on the paper to not get that teardrop look. And I think it worked on this one. And I'm going right around the edge. So all that detail that's on the front is on the back, on the side as well. So you can see here, if your shading or your highlighting with the white wasn't perfect, when you add this on top of it, it pushes that further back. And then it all works together. I think one of the things that we do is we panic in the earlier stages without realizing. So here is the finished product. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you use the techniques, if not to create something identical, to create something similar using those techniques. Thank you so much for watching. Again, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and Stay tuned to the very end and see the end cards. I give recommendations of things that use similar stencil, similar theme, similar colors. Bye.